Hey, sports card fans, it's John, Boggs fan. Hope you're all doing well. Today, I'm going to be answering the question of the week that Graig over at MidLife Sports Cards has asked everyone in the community. And that is, what is the most important condition criteria for cards and why? So the four main areas of condition that he wants us to choose from are centering, registration, surface, and corners. Now, what all of us consider as a card with nice eye appeal is in the eye of the beholder. We all have different criteria that we want for our cards that have the nicest eye appeal to us. Now, I have cards in my collection that are slightly off center. I have cards in my collection that the surface may have a little bit of paper loss or some creases. I definitely have some cards in my collection that do not have perfect corners. When it comes to registration, I don't have really any cards in my collection I can think of off the top of my head where the registration is off. So you may think, all right, the most important criteria for me is that the card has to have nice registration. Well, that's not really the case. I would actually put that at the bottom of the list. And the reason why is for most vintage cards, I don't really see a problem with the registration. Now, you'll get that there are two sets that do come to mind that have a lot of registration issues to them, and that's the 1949 Leaf set and the 1949 Bowman set. And it's because how they produced the cards, they had an actual image of the player, and then they ran through and did a color overlay for the hat and the uniform and so on. And not all the time do they get both correct and lined up properly. So you'll see a lot of cards from those two sets where the two phases of the printing just don't match up very well. That would bother me. But the fact that it's only for those two sets, maybe some pre-war sets, you may get some registration issues. But for me, I don't really encounter cards from most vintage sets where the registration is off. You will get ones that sort of have that little 3D look to them, maybe some of the multicolor runs to get the image maybe off a little bit and sort of gives that little 3D look. But to me, that doesn't happen very often, or at least the examples that I look at. So in general, I consider that the least of the four criteria that I'm worried about. For me, eye appeal can mean different things for different cards. The way I approach eye appeal is when I first look at a card, what is the first thing that catches my eye? Do I notice a card's off center? Do I notice a crease? Do I focus on the image of the player? Does that grab my attention first? And other issues in the card that the card may have are secondary? If so, I may be more willing to be a little bit relaxed on the criteria that maybe for another card I would be more concerned of. But Graig wants us to know which of the four is the most important to us when we're looking at purchasing vintage cards. So if registration is fourth on the list, probably number 3 would be corners. I am a lot less concerned about the corners and how sharp the corners are if everything else on the card looks great. Now, with that said, if I'm looking at a 1976 Topps card, okay, I don't want a card with rounded corners. But if I'm looking at a 1948 Bowman card, I'm much more likely to think a card still has really nice eye appeal if the card has some rounded corners. So again, it depends upon the card, but I'm a lot more willing to accept corner issues on cards and still think that a card has really nice eye appeal. So we've eliminated corners and registration. So what's left is centering and surface, creases, paper loss. I don't really like cards that have any paper loss on the front. I have a 1909 T206 Mordecai Three Finger Brown that is graded, I think it's graded a 1. Okay. The front, looking at the front, it could easily be a 5. But on the back, it has a little bit of paper loss. So the technical grade is 1. I don't really look at the back that often, and I look at the front of the card, especially for those tobacco cards. You know, the back doesn't have any stats or any information of the player. It's just what tobacco brand that particular card has. So for that tobacco card, I'm more concerned about the front, and that front looks absolutely amazing. So in that case, I don't mind a little surface paper loss. As I mentioned, I have cards that have some creases to them. Creases do matter where they are on the card. Again, if I look at the card, the first thing I notice is there's a crease right across the player's face. That's good. That's a deal killer for me. If the crease is down in the corner and maybe it's a surface crease, it's not fully where you see the actual cardboard that's broken through to the cardboard. If I don't notice those creases right away, then I'm more willing to accept creases on a card, because one, that downgrades the technical grade and may make a card more affordable for me. Case in point, a couple nationals ago when I bought my 1954 Bowman Ted Williams, I also bought the 1954 Bowman Mickey Mantle. Now, that is in a PSA 1. And the reason why it's in a PSA 1 is there are several creases on the card. None of them are like severe creases where you can see the underlying cardboard through it, but there are noticeable creases. But if you look at it really close at a certain angle, they're more prevalent. But from a little bit of a distance away, sort of like a just handout distance, they aren't as obvious. And so overall, to me, that is a great looking copy for that grade, and more importantly, fit my budget. It was the only way I was able to afford that card without postponing and spending 2 or 3 times what I did for that card to maybe get one without as many creases. So I thought it was a great looking copy for that technical grade, fit into my budget, and I am really happy to have that card in my collection. So creases could be an issue depending on how severe and where they are on the card, and if it's something that I notice right away. So probably in second place, I would put surface issues, creases, paper loss. So what's left is centering. So for the most part, I am a centering person. Now, again, do I have some cards that are slightly off center in my collection? Yes. One example that I can point out is my 1953 Bowman Warren Spawn. If I remember correctly, it's off center top to bottom, I believe. And with the 53 Bowmans, I also have a Stan Musial that is off-center top to bottom as well. I'm more forgiving on the top to bottom centering than I am left to right. It's just how my eyes work and how I look at a card. But for that 1953 Bowman Warren Spawn, the colors are amazing. I don't think the card has any creases, has some corner issues. But when I first look at that card, my eyes immediately go to the image of Warren Spawn. It doesn't go to, oh, this card's off center. If that was the case, I wouldn't have purchased that card. So I am somewhat flexible on centering, but for the most part, and especially based on the design of the set. So an example there is 1969 Topps with the white border. Okay, you with white border cards, sometimes with the image there, you can clearly tell when you look at the card, you can clearly tell if there's centering issues. So for 69 Topps cards, I probably put centering at a top priority. For 1971 Topps, probably the left to right is more important. I may be a little bit more forgiving on the top to bottom, just the way the overall design of the card is. You don't quite notice whether that top border before the name is a little bit more or less than it should be. You can notice it on the bottom a little bit, but again, it's where my eye goes to. So, do I have cards that in my collection that have various imperfections? Yes, I do. But all of those cards, to me, when I look at them, those imperfections are not as important to me because I can see the overall eye appeal to me of that card, and the flaws aren't prevalent or have a priority on that card. But if I had to rank, centering would be my most important criteria, because you get a really off-center card. For me, that is the thing that I tend to see the most, and that just causes me to say, no, I just don't like that card. So I don't think I would ever have a card in my collection that has a OC qualifier that is off center. With that said, I do have to sort of not hedge my bets, but just because I'm not collecting these cards right now. But if I ever in my collecting history start getting into pre-war cards, now you're talking about cards where the printing method was very basic. A lot of the cards may be on the rare or hard to find scale. So when you're dealing with cards that are rare or really hard to find, you almost have to throw some of your criteria out just to be able to say you have a copy of that card. So if I start getting into some of more T206s, T207s, some of the caramel cards from the late 1910s into the 1920s, cards of that era, I'll probably be more willing to get a card that has some centering issues, just because there aren't a lot of copies out there. And the ones that have really, really nice eye appeal are probably going to be way above my price range. So budget factors into it as well, especially the older the card is, the more flaws you're probably going to have in it, and you have to be a little flexible. But for now, the vintage cards that I'm looking at to add to my collection, 1948 Bowman to 1980, in that range there, centering is the key for me. It doesn't have to be perfect 50-50. I can have a little bit of leeway, again, based on the set design. But for the most part, I look for fairly well-centered cards. Corners don't matter that much to me. I can take some creases if there's a little bit of paper loss, if it's not prevalent or it detracts from the back of a card. I'm willing to sacrifice that, especially if it's a very expensive card. And the only way for me to afford it, like that Mickey Mantle, is to have some sort of maybe a little bit of paper loss on the back. And then registration, I think for me, the cards I'm looking at is really a non-issue. Once I get to maybe picking up some 49 Leaf and 49 Bowman cards, registration is probably going to be just right up there with centering, because those they're prone to have registration issues. So, Greg, another excellent question that you posed for all of us this week. We'd love to know in the comments, what do you have as your top priority for the condition criteria in the cards that you're looking for? Are you a centering guy? Are you a corner guy? I know there are some out there that say, hey, the way they were printed off center is the way they were printed, so I like cards that have maintained really sharp corners over the years. Maybe you absolutely do not want any single crease on your card. You'll take some rounded corners, you'll take some off centering, but you don't want any creases on the card. So we'd love to know what are some of your top criteria in the comments of this video here. And with that, that's all I have for you. So until next time, thanks for watching.